Hi, everyone. Welcome. We are thrilled to have you join us today. My name is Tara Sullivan. I'm an investor on the team at Flare. Flare Capital is a venture firm dedicated to investing in early stage companies at the intersection of healthcare and technology. And we're excited to host you all today for our quarterly expert roundtable. Our focus will be on AI in pharma innovation. Before we jump in, a couple quick notes. First, on recording. We are recording today's session. It will be posted on our website soon after. Feel free to revisit or share it with colleagues. And about this series, we host these roundtables every quarter to spotlight trends in healthcare innovation. So if you're a healthcare operator, investor, founder, we hope you find today's discussion valuable. And as always, would love to continue the conversation with you. And before we hand it over to our experts, I'll set the stage with a couple quick data points on today's topic. This first slide shows profit pools across the healthcare industry. And as you can see on the left side of the slide, pharma and biotech make up a large and growing share of total profits in our industry. Even as other parts of the ecosystem are feeling margin pressure, these sectors continue to grow, innovate, expand their earnings base. And that's important to today's conversation because it underscores both the scale of the opportunity and the resources pharma can choose to invest in AI. It positions the industry to accelerate innovation in the near term. Now, let's look at where that innovation is starting to take shape within pharma. AI innovation is accelerating across R&D, clinical development, and commercial. It's estimated there's over 100 billion in value to be created by AI across these areas. We're especially excited about the momentum we're seeing in the venture market, where founders are building truly transformative solutions across these segments and partnering with pharma. And several of those innovators are with us on today's panel, ready to share how they're helping redefine what's possible with pharma. While venture-backed founders are building, pharma companies are also moving rapidly to innovate. Across the industry, we're seeing a very deliberate mix of internal AI development, strategic partnerships, and targeted acquisitions, all aimed at acceleration of AI adoption. We've highlighted here several of the direct investments and collaborations that we found particularly compelling over the last year or two, and each is a signal of pharma's increasing commitment to AI transformation. This is a very small set of examples, and they highlight how pharma is complementing the startup innovation we're seeing with their own initiatives. And this just reinforces the broader momentum across the ecosystem. To dive much deeper on these quick trends, we have 6 fantastic leaders joining us today, and they bring experience from across pharma, biotech, big tech, and startups. So we're going to get a truly 360-degree view of where the industry is headed. We will start with a fireside chat with our pharma leaders. Najat Khan, Chief R&D Officer and Chief Commercial Officer at Recursion, Deepak Nair, Director of Healthcare and Life Sciences at AWS, Faisal Khan, Corporate Vice President of AI and Analytics at Novo Nordisk. And after that, we'll shift to our innovators panel featuring Anita Modi, co-founder and CEO at Peer AI, Dr. Michelle Longmire, co-founder and CEO at Medable, and Matt Wallach, co-founder and board member at Viva Systems. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to my teammate, Dan, to welcome our first panelists. Over to you, Dan.
Thanks, Tara. As our panelists join the stage, as you've highlighted, there's been a lot of excitement around the adoption of AI in pharma, from aiding in discovery and development to optimizing the labor-intensive clinical trial and regulatory processes to improving the last mile commercialization approved products. Despite all that excitement, we're still in the early days of the level of deployment as it ranges from experimentation to enterprise-wide adoption. And so we've invited speakers who are on the front lines of AI adoption in pharma to share their experiences and dive a little deeper. I might have each panelist introduce themselves as well as their organizations. Najat, I'll start with you.
Great. Thank you, Dan. Great to be here. And this is a small community. So Faisal, great to see you again. And Deepak, nice to meet you. So Najat Khan, Chief R&D Officer, Chief Commercial Officer, Recursion. I'm also on the board. Recursion is a tech bio or AI native company focused on really starting with a first principles mindset in terms of how do we transform discovery and development. It is not an easy endeavor. AI can't do it all. It's really, to me, the integration of where can you apply AI that has the largest sort of breaking points of how you develop a medicine, which, as we all know, the stats are not great. Success rate is low, 10%, and timelines are long, and cost is high. Prior to that, I was at J&J for about 7 years as the chief data science officer, and I was also the global head of our J&J strategy and portfolio organization. So really linking how do we make medicines with where we can deploy AI. Great to be here.
Thank you, Najat. Deepak?
Yeah, hi. Deepak Nair, AWS. I lead our life sciences and medtech business globally. Been with the company 10 years, and I think being at AWS gives us a sort of a unique vantage point to see the industry, a zoomed out version in many cases, but also a zoomed in version in many cases. And I think the community is in fact small. Najat, I think we've worked with J&J previously, and I think Faisal, I've heard from the team about our work with you. So it is in fact a small community, and a lot of interesting news making its way through, including from yesterday. Super excited to talk about what's happening. There's something happening every single day, but how much of it can you realize in big enterprises? That continues to be the question, what it takes from a data perspective, from an accelerator perspective, because everybody wants to get to the finish line. It's a long way to get there. Love to engage in this conversation.
Perfect, Deepak. And then Faisal.
Thanks for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Faisal Khan. I'm the Corporate VP for AI and Analytics at Novo Nordisk. Currently focused on applications in pharma, but I've had the privilege of working in this space over the last 20 years across the whole value spectrum, whether it's diagnostics, drug development, even providers or payers. And it's been a privilege to see this space evolve over time and see what we're doing. I think what's really key, and this may be a little bit of a different perspective than you, Deepak, is the industries or the enterprises where I've had the privilege of working and contributing, we're not delivering a technical solution. The goal is to use AI, advanced quantitative perspectives, to help accelerate a life sciences solution, whether that's bringing a new drug to market, helping patients better understand their disease, or something else. But the end product is helping people live healthier, better lives in some way. And for us, it's about how do we best leverage technological innovations in a value-added way to do that.
Totally.
Oh, that's a perfect transition, Faisal. Let me start with you. What are some of the use cases where you believe that AI will have the most impact to achieve some of those goals that you've described? Where has Novo been either experimenting or adopting AI today?
Yeah, that's a great question. What I'll say is we're beyond the point across the industry of talking about experimenting and pilots. Across the whole pharma value chain, whether it's R&D, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's sales and marketing, there is the use of AI integrated across the whole spectrum. I think it's also just important to distinguish that AI is a really broad term. I think most of us these days, when we say AI, we're probably referring to generative AI, but there are also applications under that umbrella for traditional machine learning, other types of artificial intelligence approaches. So if we look at any large pharma company, and it's obviously a different story at smaller biotechs or mid-sized pharma, but starting from the very first part of the value chain where you're trying to identify new targets, trying to then synthesize new molecules, do preclinical safety assessments, there's AI and Gen AI involved in that whole value chain. As you start to move into the clinical space, whether you're looking at new endpoints, new ways to stratify patients, digital twins, simulations of trials, but also beyond the scientific on the operational side of things, whether you're looking at supply chain, site selection and optimization, protocol authoring, there are AI products at scale. I think what's important here to keep in mind is there is a difference between those applications which you have to keep a regulatory perspective in mind and those where you may not. For instance, a regulator may care less about how well you can predict your sites. That's very important for you operationally, but they care a lot about how you're going to be deciding who gets a new drug. And so because of that perspective, there is a difference in the scale of adoption and sophistication and experimentation as well. And then as you get out of that R&D value chain, optimized manufacturing, quality control, computer vision systems on the manufacturing line to out into sales and marketing and identifying new ways to get your literature out there, identify leads. It's across the whole value spectrum. And I think most large pharma is privileged that we have activities across that space. Mid-size, smaller biotechs, I think they have to decide where it makes sense to place those bets internally versus maybe partner with someone. And that's something we have to as well.
No, that's a great overview. So it sounds like there are myriad use cases across the organization. You are thoughtful about whether or not it's a regulatory facing activity versus an internally facing activity because the controls there may be a little bit different, but you're way past the phase of experimentation at this point. Najat, tell us a little bit more about how Recursion is using AI to accelerate the end-to-end drug discovery pipeline.
Yeah, I would say it's discovery and development. So I've been there, gosh, a year and 3-4 months, and really the platform has evolved dramatically. First with the acquisition of Exscientia. So really starting from an AI, biology, novel targets, novel pathways, to coupling that with the ability to actually design molecules to drug that target. And then also building out the clinical AI element as well. Maybe I'll take it from a slightly different angle, which is when we look at the macro world overall, Recursion started with the focus of decoding biology and to improve patient lives, and you do that by making transformational therapeutics. When it comes to biology, the range is pretty broad. People will say we understand maybe 10 or 15% of biology overall. So if we don't comprehensively understand the root cause, it's pretty difficult to do all the other steps. So the company started with phenomics, which is really looking at cells, doing a lot of perturbations that mimic diseases, and then really assessing how to go from disease to natural state. The platform has moved a lot from phenomics to genetics, transcriptomics, and also patient data. Why? A lot of people talk about multimodal. To me, multimodality is important because you actually get a deeper pathway understanding of disease, not just a target understanding of disease. And if you look, that is where biology is going. That sort of systems approach is what we need to more comprehensively understand what's driving the disease. But there's also another element, which is how do we pick the right patients that might actually benefit from resolving whatever challenges that are going on? Usually you'll hear people start to talk about that in early development. We're starting to do that in discovery. So we don't want to disconnect an understanding of biology from the patient population that would benefit the most. So that's where really the omics plus patient data makes a difference. So that's been a big change in the last year or so. The second piece, and the other thing macro, is novel biology is going to be an important IP angle in addition to your IP angle from a molecule perspective, given the competition. Look at what's happening in China. The ability to do things better, faster, even if it's through brute force, really around targets that are known. So where is that next frontier? Novel biology that's not known to others. And that's where our partnerships with Roche and Sanofi also kick in, whether it's in neuroscience, I&I, or onc. The second piece, and just before I move on from that, we have about 65 petabytes of data. Volume is interesting, but it's the proprietary piece that's really important and is usable to train AI models. We have our own automated labs, dry lab, wet lab, so we're constantly validating, doing that loop. I think you've seen other industries go that way. Look at tech, look at like the automation, where eventually you get to a point where your models are predicting what experiments for you to run. We talk a lot about autonomous agents. We talk a lot about automation, autonomous work. We're creating the foundation for that. That's a capability that's really important to have. A couple of just other points. The other piece is, yes, great to have novel biology that's actionable. How do you design molecules? So that's where the acquisition and the special combination with Exscientia is really important, Dan, right? Using generative AI to really have novel scaffolds, which again is important from an IP perspective, but then active learning and other approaches in terms of optimizing the hardest part, right? Multi-parameter optimization. How do you predict tox? So there's a lot of work going on there as well. As an example, generally we synthesize about 250 compounds to get to the lead that we take into clinical trials. Industry averages are orders of magnitude 3,000-4,000 higher. Why? You're getting to a point of you want to do more things in silico and really only synthesize where you have a lot of conviction, similar to what you saw in a lot of other industries, including tech, right? Do more predictions, make only what you really believe in, and learn super fast and reiterate. And also the timings, right? Some of our programs in the clinic take about 18 to 24 months to go through the entire discovery engine. That's much shorter. Now, the proof to me is always in the pudding, which is clinical, right? How do these actually do in the clinic? And there, number one, if we have a 90% failure rate, and if you get that to 80%, that's twice the number of drugs. But that still means you fail 8 times out of 10. So how do you increase your probability of success? So there we built out some of the things Faisal mentioned, and also what I had done at J&J before. Patient stratification is the name of the game. who's going to respond better. So you get a signal in discovery and you iterate as you go through discovery. Recruitment. We're in oncology, rare disease. Oncology is incredibly competitive. So how do you fish in places that others are not and use data? So we use real world data, claims data, a lot of that, AI algorithms to then predict where we should recruit. So those are a couple of the other areas, which is not just the design, which patients, which, inclusion, exclusion, simulating those trials well, so you don't change it too many times, but then also being super efficient in how we can get to a go, no go fast. And look, there are some programs, we have 4 in the clinic, 2 more coming in. We do on our own, some we partner with others. So we have that openness in doing that. But last thing I'll say, I do think it's because often people will say, Najat, of the 3 areas, what's your favorite? And I said, listen, if you look at the impact of AI in other industries, you start with a moat, but very soon you go into adjacencies and you have vertical integration. Why? Because it's the compounding impact of AI to make better products, in our case, drugs, is where you see the true value. So it really has to be that end-to-end tech stack. And that's more work to do, but that's what we're focused on.
Yeah, no, it's pretty comprehensive at the highest level. You're taking the power of all omics data, combining that with patient data to dramatically improve the efficiency and the success rate of that end-to-end discovery and development process. So that's really exciting. Deepak, maybe hand it over to you. You are unique in that Amazon is a large technology company with several divisions, right? Several capabilities and skill sets that you bring to bear in working with pharma organizations. Where are you spending your time at AWS Life Sciences and improving efficiency in pharma using AI?
Yeah, I think a lot of the use cases that pharma's leaning on us, I think we've already covered in Faisal and Najat. I think for the longest time, we provide a super secure, scalable cloud infrastructure that continues to be something that pharma companies still rely on us for a lot on. And even in the age of agentic and prior to that, Gen AI, I think platforms like Bedrock and Agent Code and things of that nature, we continue to provide that infrastructure so customers can build very scalable solutions for themselves. I think what we're seeing increasingly, though, is there's people want to get to the end results faster, like I said. So there's been a lot more demand of us in building accelerators. So for the common use cases, I think there's hundreds of use cases for sure. But for the most common ones, be it in research, clinical, commercial, manufacturing, for the most common ones, there's been asks of us in terms of, can you build accelerators that get us 50, 60% of the way there? And then it's, of course, all the data and the plumbing that our customers have to do in-house because it's proprietary data for them. So there's a lot of work that we're doing in that space. And our hope is that for the same patterns that we see over and over again, there's no need to reinvent at least the basic building blocks that are necessary. So we are really doing a lot of work and investing a bunch of time and energy into that for the same sort of common set of use cases. It could be everything from target discovery to anything in clinical around patient recruitment or just supply chain control tower to making sure that the lines are operating well, or be it in commercial in terms of content intelligence. All of those are use cases where we building accelerators, hopefully coming out soon, that allows customers to get very quickly to the outcomes, and really abstract away from the tech itself. The tech is interesting, but not as much as the solution and that running in production. So we're really trying to move very quickly there. And then there's a lot of work happening around data. I think Najat talked about data. I think we used to focus a lot on building scalable data warehouses and data lakes and things of that nature. And then at some level, you maybe even help customers move data around, but nobody wants to do that anymore. With agents, you're trying to make data discoverability as easy as possible, especially for multimodality, and enabling them to retain data where it is, but still get the insights where they need it. So a lot of work happening in that space. And I think we'll continue to be investing in those sort of things because everybody wants to solve for the same set of problems. And we feel like we have a unique position to be able to bring a lot of it to market.
That's great. I might bring it back to you. Many of the individuals in our audience either they work at early stage companies or working with early stage companies or investing in them. Within your organization, when you think about the deployment of AI, there's always an implicit buy or build decision. Maybe talk a little bit about your thought process at Novo in terms of buy or build. Do you build things internally, maybe partnering with large foundational model manufacturers, or do you go to the market and work with early stage companies? And so maybe if you could give a few examples of areas where you're spending some time.
Yeah, definitely. First of all, I don't think there's any one right answer here, right? Because we're across the whole spectrum of build, buy, and even borrow. I think it's more important to think about the factors that go into any one decision. First of all, there's things that are in our critical path, things that may where we might want to protect IP versus areas where it's non-competitive or it's not in our critical path. We also, despite being a large company, we have a limit on the number of resources and we got to optimize where do we place our bets. And we do not have a monopoly on smart people. I like to say I work with a lot of smart people, but there's a lot of other smart people out there. So really it comes down to where does it make sense for us? And it's a different calculus for every single decision. Working at a large company, we always have folks reaching out to us. I have a lot of colleagues, old colleagues, people I've been at conferences and just cold calls saying, hey, we'd like to do something. And at the end of the day, I think the mistake that a lot of earlier stage organizations make is they've got a lot of smart people and they've got a lot of hunger. So what they do is they reach out to folks like me, colleagues elsewhere, and they say, can we help you solve a problem? We've got a lot of smart people. Let's do a pilot. Let's try something out. Frankly speaking, I'm trying to find a cure for a disease called pilotitis, right? We're all piloted out. There's only limited bandwidth, and you got to look at it from how do you incentivize me to partner or to buy? Either you got to solve a problem that I can't solve myself, or I'm not interested in solving myself, or I may be very interested, but you're already 3, 4 years ahead, and it would be silly of me not to capitalize on that. So you may have a solution that's already gone through a regulatory pathway that's significantly more mature. You have access to proprietary data that I could never get access to. And that's the conversation where earlier stage partners get traction with us. And it's a different conversation depending on if it's a scientific problem versus an operational problem, which asset we're talking about. So there's no one right answer. But I think for early stage startups, you got to keep in mind a lot of them approach me to say, let's do something. And I might have bandwidth, if at all, to do one pilot in the whole year. And we're getting contacted by 20 to 30 potential partners every month, right? I'm not going to do that many pilots. It's the people who get more are where I'm like, I'll save time. You've got a solution here that's already done. You've got a solution here that I can't put resources on, but we can accelerate. Or there's a sense here that this is a pre-competitive space, and maybe we can partner with other industries, other partners across the industry, because this is not where we have our IP considerations. And I'd encourage early stage companies or those who work with early stage companies to keep that in mind. Come in to help me solve a problem that I have, or I might not even know I have, and say, yes, this is a no-brainer, let's go. If you just knock on the door and say, we've got a lot of smart people and a lot of cool tech and let's do something, you're probably the fifth person I'm talking to that week that does that.
Oh, that's great. Najat, maybe same question. Recursion has this unique position in the middle. You work with much larger pharmaceutical organizations, and then you also have the opportunity to work with early stage companies. And so how do you think about partnering with early stage companies? What problems are you looking to solve that it may not necessarily be the most efficient way for you to solve it, such that you can continue to create value for large pharma?
Yeah. Dan, you mentioned something in that brief context, which is what areas are you not maybe best poised to do well? And whether I was in large pharma or at Recursion now, that's the question that I think from a buyer perspective, people don't answer honestly. A lot of the times people tend to over-index what they can do and under-index what others can do. And I think that's a very important. And then what ends up happening is you end up with a lot of pilots where let me see, let me dip my toe in the water and see if there's something there. Here's the issue. The issue is those that actually end up doing more of the strategic partnerships, it can be from any side. You end up losing out because you're only nibbling. You're dabbling. You're not really going all in. And it was funny, last year we published a paper in Nature. So I founded this group called Disrupt, which is the AI leaders across pharma, I think the top 12 pharma companies. And we did a benchmarking looking at the entire value chain, where is pharma playing? And there's a lot of pilots. There's only a couple of companies, and it was sanitized who they are, that are doing things end to end. And one of the main reasons is not a good assessment of really where you need to play and what your internal capabilities are. And this is not just AI. This is also true in just biotech and pharma overall. There's always a tendency to say, made it in company X is better than not. So with that, I'll say the way I think about it is that true assessment on, can we do it better, faster? And also, is that where we're uniquely positioned to win? So for instance, we're in small molecules today. I want us to win in small molecules. But if and when we cross that bridge and we want to go into biologics, is that something we have to do from scratch, or would I actually do a strategic partnership with another company? Can go either way, but I am very open. I have a philosophy which is smart wins, and it doesn't have to be the four walls that you live in. We have a broader ecosystem, and that's where you'll see a lot of the pharma companies that are very successful today actually did that. 50% of the ideas came from the outside. So if you take the ego out of the room and you really look and say, who can help me win? Then you end up doing a lot of partnerships. The other thing I'd also say is like our partnerships on the other side with Roche and Sanofi, these are large strategic partnerships. It's a lot of co-development of areas. So with Roche, for instance, is generating that sort of multimodal data for novel biology, neuroscience, and GI-onc. First milestone was last year, 30 million, more coming. And then we're actually translating those into programs. That's like an era of new biology altogether, because you want to be able to compete in first-in-class areas. With Sanofi, the focus is really around taking hard targets and designing molecules that are challenging to do in I&I and in oncology. Look, we are privileged to work with partners like that are so knowledgeable in the spaces, neuroscience, I&I, etc. But also, they also have phenomenal AI teams. But it's a collaborative effort. It's how do we 1 + 1 is 100, not 1 + 1 is am I better than you, and so forth. I think that's where the companies really win, because what's winning is you have a pipeline and marketed products that are more differentiated than others. That's the end of the game. And because you win there, patients win, and also your stakeholders. I think for smaller companies, just the last thing I'll say is it is important to not lead with models and data, but actually to lead with the application for a problem that matters. And that's what Faisal was saying. Absolutely. And a lot of the times they will have a KOL on board who knows drug development, but you can see the core management is, I don't really think I want to make drugs. I just want to I want to break the system and but to break the systems, to do first principles, you have to break it down to the core truths. And to understand the core truths, you have to go through the process of understanding what it means to make a drug. So that would be my only advice, because sometimes you can suggest a problem that I don't even know I have. That's okay. Humility counts. But it's really important to actually go in with a problem to solve versus just data and models. I think the years of doing that was 5 years ago. I don't think that works anymore.
Maybe Deepak, I'll give you the last word. Opportunity for early stage companies. What sorts of problems are your pharma partners coming to you hoping to solve?
No, I think we've touched upon a lot of those use cases. Quite honestly, I think biology and chemistry is really hard. I think Faisal and Najat can probably attest to that. I do find we, as in AWS, finds a lot of opportunities in clinical and commercial, to be honest. If you just want me to zero in on 2 domain areas, it's because the linearity of the workflows, there's a lot of opportunity for AI and agentic given the times we live in. And the way we think about it is there's a bunch of personas that have operated in this space for a long time. There are a bunch of workflows that have evolved organically, sometimes for the wrong reasons in these areas for the last 20, 30 years now. So we have taken a fresh look at all of that over the last 2 years, broken it down, figured out what can we actually go change, and some disproportionately matter in terms of time and time to value. So we've been focused on that. I think for the startups where we find those opportunities is, can we go fix one workflow end to end? And what role can a startup working together with Amazon play in this space? To Najat's point, hopefully we can demonstrate there is value in doing this. So it's not another pilot that kind of runs for 3 months and then nobody sees it after that. So I think really finding those workflows, identifying and everybody's burning platform is going to be different, right? So finding the right burning platform for a particular pharma, and given the position we are in, we see a lot of it from inside. So how do we solve for those, and finding those unique partnerships where we can position them in conjunction with Amazon, our infrastructure, to solve those problems. I think that's where you see the opportunity.
It's a great way to tie up the conversation. Automating existing workflows that Faisal flagged are real problems for pharma. And as Najat pointed out, that stratifies the patient populations to create the most impact. And we could continue this conversation for the rest of the hour, but unfortunately we're out of time. Thank you all so much for those really great insights. We look forward to staying engaged and continuing the conversation. I will transition over to my colleague, Tara, who will be moderating a panel of innovators. Tara?
Awesome. Thanks so much, Dan. That was a great conversation, and excited to keep it rolling with a couple esteemed founders. welcome Matt and Anita as you guys make your way to the spotlight. I think what's going to make this conversation fun is that these founders at different stages of the journey to scale. So we're going to dive into what they're seeing at different stages on the pharma AI landscape and how that's influencing the way their companies are thinking about product roadmaps and go to market with pharma. So why don't we start by having you each share maybe a 1-minute intro on yourself and your company. Matt, let me kick it over to you first.
Sure. Thanks for having me. So I'm basically a soccer guy from Philly, and then I became a software guy. We founded Viva in 2007. Viva today is a pretty important company to the industry. We're about 3 billion in sales with meaningful market share across clinical, regulatory, quality, building and safety, medical and commercial. I was president of the company until I retired in 2019. Now I am a board member, and so basically I'm a soccer guy in Philly again.
Awesome. Good thing to be. And Anita, over to you.
Yeah, thank you for having me here today. So Anita Modi, I'm the CEO and co-founder here of Pure AI. I started Pure AI a couple years ago after spending close to 20 years in this industry and specifically building technology for clinical research. So for here at Pure, we are addressing a $15 billion market around life sciences documentation. As many of you are in this industry know, it's a huge bottleneck in ultimately getting drugs over to patients. So we've built an agentic AI platform. It's used by biotech and top 20 pharma to author documents across the spectrum of preclinical, clinical, and CMC, driving huge efficiency gains as well as quality and compliance too. So for us, being in the front row of building during this incredibly wild time, I think it's just been exciting to see so much of the promise around drug development and the potential of AI really play out. I think all the thoughts shared in the previous panel are spot on. We're early in that transformation, and it's so critical to focus on really what's the value that we're bringing to the table. So excited to share more today.
Awesome. And Anita, today's webinar comes at very exciting timing since Pure just announced its latest fundraising round this morning. Our team at Flare is just thrilled to begin the partnership. So congrats on the successful raise and excited for everything ahead for the Pure team.
Yeah, thank you, Tara. We're thrilled to officially be part of the Flare family. And really, this fundraise is an indication, I think, of the market opportunity and what we're ultimately seeing from customers. And I think the transformation that's happening right now.
Awesome. Okay, with that great transition into, let's talk about how your companies are driving value within sensitive workflows for pharma customers. Maybe tell us a little bit more about where your products fit into pharma workflows and how you've built trust. We know that building AI products requires accessing data, places within an organization. And so we would love to learn more. And maybe Anita, we can pass it back to you first. Since you're building in a highly sensitive pharma workflow, tell us how you're managing that.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, at Pure, we're addressing the space of regulatory documentation. So putting together documents that you would submit to regulatory bodies as part of the drug development process. Today, a lot of this work is heavily manual. It's very fragmented, heavily outsourced. Often the way it's done is you have teams working in Microsoft Word on one monitor, looking at kind of data files and PDFs and other formats in another one. So when you think about where our AI-driven workflow sits, it fits nicely between what's happening upstream around data collection that exists today and what's happening downstream around really submission of these documents. So think about that in between kind of being wide open space that is just largely manual today. And so when you bring this back to data, our focus ultimately in this sort of moment of transformation is thinking about how do we make it easy? How do we make it easy for our customers, easy for users? We recognize we're not just introducing technology into this, but an entire new level of intelligence into this process. And we have to think equal parts about what a solution looks like, but also change management and how to reduce burden on that individual and that company as well. So data-wise, it means integrating, right? Integrating directly into source data through our APIs. Also to accelerate time to value, we've just pointed towards folders of raw data, the same data sets they're ultimately providing to CROs or contractors to do that work. And so for us, it's saying, how do we plug into kind of data streams that already exist? Also, we've also, I think, been smart in building and how we treat that data. We don't train off those data sets. I know there's a lot of conversation about that in the previous panel. We don't fine tune based off those data sets. Rather, what we've built is these document specific agents that understand the context of the output and what makes good protocols or CSRs or INDs and understand the relationship between data and content, but we're not actually learning from that data. And I think that's really important when you're ultimately driving trust and how to drive value in this space. The last note I'll say is, especially when you're working with this sensitive data, I think trust starts with the team, right? We've built a team here at Peer that has built Part 11 compliant technology, has been audited by the FDA, has background in cybersecurity, worked with early transformer architecture that led to the LLM revolution, like deeply understands both the industry and respects the frameworks here, as well as the data itself. And I think when you're working with customers in this sort of novel period, trust really starts there from the ground up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think talking about data sensitivity, it makes a lot of sense to talk about clinical trials next. And Michelle, welcome. So happy to have you. Maybe we could ask you to offer just a brief introduction to yourself and to Medable, and then maybe tell us a little bit about how Medable is thinking about incorporating AI into your clinical trials tech stack.
Great. So thank you. And I'm here at the National Press Office in DC, coming right out of another presentation. I'm excited to be here. My background, I'm Michelle Longmire. I'm a physician scientist. The idea for Medable came from my work at Stanford, where I was doing research on rare disease patients and caring for patients clinically. And the big insight was, one, research is so slow. The data, often cases, doesn't actually answer some of the core research questions that we really want to be able to answer. And we have poor access to the trials. So founded Medable, here we are about 8-10 years later, depending on how we measure that starting point. And the biggest inflection points in technology present the biggest opportunities. So Medable was really initially leveraging cloud and mobile, right, to provide access to clinical trials. And we launched decentralized clinical trials. We've now done over 200 registrational trials where our technology provided critical access. Now we're at this amazing inflection point again with the cognitive revolution. And we have been using this technology internally now for over 2 years. And just to set the stage, with our product for decentralized clinical trials and ECOA, we take a protocol and then we essentially configure software to be the companion for patients and the companion for sites or doctors during that clinical trial. And these are very complex, multi-year, very complex workflows. And we launch that into 70 languages, into 100 plus locales worldwide. So our first applications of AI and agentic AI were actually internal. And we said, what takes 20 weeks and 5 people, can we use agentic AI to bring that time down? And we showed that we were able to do this. We were able to take the implementation of our software, really a protocol fit digital solution, and launch it in less than a week with 1 person. 20 weeks, 5 people, down to less than a week and 1 person. So we then said, hey, this agentic AI opportunity to go after the clinical trial white space is massive, and that agents can truly serve as human collaborators, and we can enable humans to do more strategic work and shift a lot of the tactical work to agentic AI. And so our release this year, in the most recently, was for a clinical research associate agent. And in that, what we've shown is that we can provide about a 20% plus efficiency gain. And we're able to execute across systems. The clinical research associates looking across 13 systems. They're managing the trial to make sure the data is accurate. They're looking at drug supply. They're looking at patient enrollment. They're looking at a number of variables. And when we started looking at this use case, CRAs were saying, I'm spending too much time on email. I'm spending too much time in system of record. And I want this information to be managed. And I just want to work on the strategic part of this. So our AI agent for CRAs autonomously executes what could be up to north of 50% of the CRA activities, and really enables the CRAs now to do this super strategic work. We've launched a platform to build these agentic collaborators on, and now our customers are going in a number of different really exciting directions. So we have internal use cases that fueled where we saw the opportunity. Ultimately, for us, it's about closing the white space and reducing the clinical trial timelines.
Wow, that's awesome. Congrats. Those are pretty remarkable early kind of numbers and results from building those agentic capabilities. So very excited to track along with you. And Matt, maybe let's talk about how Veeva thinks about building more AI capabilities. You sit at the center of so many pharma workflows today across a large base of customers that have been trusting you with their data for years. So how do you think about where to start building AI into the stack? And yeah, where do you think kind of agent and generative capabilities most naturally are built in?
Yeah, so because of our vantage point in the industry, it's probably more relevant to talk about that than the specific use cases, like our other speakers, who I think did a good job of that. Because we sit on the industry's data, we have 90% market share in some areas and growing in others. We can see everything that's going on in the industry in workflows that go from preclinical all the way through commercial. So one approach is to leverage the industry's data for agents that can help everyone. But you have to be super, super careful about how you do that. And you can't make any mistakes because we're sitting literally on the industry's data. And so the approach that we're taking first is to build agents within the Vault platform that will have natural access to all of the data that is within Vault for that customer, and then combine that with their choice of a large language model and then any other publicly available information to target the use cases that they want to start with. I think that over time, there will be an opportunity for us to partner with the industry broadly to look for opportunities to use agents that are across customers' repositories of data. And maybe that would be in collaboration with the FDA or some other government body. But I don't think it's safe to start there. I think we need to learn more about how the industry is going to operate agents and use the data and use the insights. I think the industry needs to get smarter about how they're going to do it. So I think we'll start with agents that just work on the customer specific data, but there may be an opportunity to do something much larger in the future.
Yeah. Very interesting. And maybe with kind of that in mind, would love to talk about how the three of you are seeing pharma buying behaviors for AI products and solutions, given that you have different vantage points here. And maybe we can talk first about early stage vantage point. Anita, what is the sales process looking like right now for an emerging AI startup selling to pharma? There were some interesting kind of conversation around pilots versus larger scale engagements from the get-go in the previous conversation. I'd actually love to talk about pilots and what they might look like when they're done well, and maybe tell us a little bit about how you design an initial engagement, commercial engagement with a partner that enables you to really measure your value and then scale across the enterprise.
Yeah. So sales process for an emerging startup, let's just say not for the faint of heart, as you heard in this last panel. I think it's important to recognize just where we are right now. So much is changing. You have this entirely new technology model, figuring out the right model between large companies and startups. And then also, like in our case, you're working with buyers who are used to buying services to do this work. And now you're coming in with AI to say, we're going to bring in technology to help you ultimately do this work. And that in and of itself is a change in how buying is actually happening. So for us at this stage, every transaction is a partnership. That's how we view it. We are all on this frontier together of how to do this work, and we're very upfront about that. I think there were some comments in the earlier panel that are spot on. You need to show value right away. You need to be really clear about what that pain point is and recognize that we're in this moment of education, but on both sides, about what the future is going to look like. And so we're clear that in every transaction, we need to work together to define what's working. We need to be thinking about not just the right solution, but also the deployment model that works for change management and for that organization specifically. So how does this look in a pilot? I think our pilots are designed to do a couple different things. One is benchmark value. So let's use this as an opportunity to really measure efficiency gains. I think that's obviously synonymous with AI. But in our case, we actually measure quality as well. And we developed a whole framework to say, how can you quantify what good means for your organization and what that's going to save you downstream in terms of review time or time savings as well. So how can we use this pilot to measure that and then work with you to understand what would that be enterprise wide as you look to scale across your regulatory workflows. Our pilots also include a couple different things. Education, right? Let's dig you under the hood around what AI can do and what AI can't do. It is not a magic wand. I think you heard that in the last panel, and I will confirm that. And it's really critical early on to understand how AI can support and where you truly need a human in the loop and how. And I'll say the third part ends up being consultative, even in a pilot, right? How do we ultimately fit this solution and this technology into how this organization specifically operates? Where are they from just an AI adoption and technology perspective? What does their organization look like? What's their mix of insourcing and outsourcing? What are their kind of strategic priorities? So a lot of that comes in to how we design our pilots too. And ultimately our pilots end up being a way that we shape what the right kind of model for scale looks like as well. So from our perspective, we're very intentional with our partners about crawl, walk, run, and shaping that collaboratively. The one thing I'll call out that I think is unique to how we've built the company here at Peer is that in addition to obviously our technology team, we actually have a team of medical writers in-house as well. And I think this is so critical during this moment of transformation because our medical writers, aside from being sort of product managers, help with onboarding, they help with training, they lead support in the form of office hours, working sessions, and we think of this as a peer-to-peer perspective from our medical writers to our customers. And that has been so critical, whether it's pilot or kind of part of the sales process and scaling to truly help our customers along this journey. So for me, the sales process starts with transparency, sharing our expertise, hearing needs, building this plan, and like you heard in the last panel, showing value really off the bat. You can start to imagine what this looks like at scale.
I feel like you just gave the playbook to early stage founders thinking about designing pilots really thoughtfully. So thank you for that. And maybe one quick follow-up question. As you're engaging with different pharma companies as potential future customers, we know that many pharma are having internal conversations around try to build, experiment internally, whether to partner. So how do you as a founder navigate that dynamic in the market and think about nurturing relationships and balancing your time and go to market?
Yeah, I think I can speak to our use case around build versus buy. We have a pretty strong perspective on that around where we play. And I think from a sales perspective, it goes back to a lot of it is listening, right? Why are you trying to build? What do you see the pros being versus where do you partner? Let's first understand their strategic framework around when to build, buy, and partner as well and fit into that. I think what we're seeing, just to comment a little bit more on this, is very much a hybrid model where companies are being strategic around where to build and where to partner. And I think a lot about our view and what we dig into is it's not just about capability. We don't doubt that pharma has talent in-house, but it's really around strategic resource allocation. Every day you're building these internal capabilities, in my perspective, is a day not spent getting therapies to patients. What we ultimately see with our customers is they're experiencing value off the bat, 55 to 95% of time savings, driving quality. We live and breathe this every day. And so our perspective is working with a company where this is all they're focused on, they're committed to driving value, ultimately can lead to a better partnership when you're trying to do the 1+1 is more than 2 in the long run as well. We have these conversations. We just had this conversation last week with a company that started building internally and came back to us because it is really hard to scale. And when you have a partner who has already solved these problems, the question becomes, should we really reinvent the wheel internally, or can we partner and think about accelerating ultimately this work and the path to getting treatments to patients faster?
Awesome. Great insights, and certainly a lot of founders navigating this dynamic with their partners. Michelle, what is the temperature like in the market as you're working with pharma partners, prospects, just around adoption of AI into their clinical trial strategy? Does it feel like AI capabilities are becoming a requirement or table stakes in some of your pharma partners' clinical trial strategy?
Sure. I think people quickly get desensitized to AI for AI's sake. Really, what we're going after are partners who agree that clinical development is bottlenecked by humans at this point. And I think if you look at the output of the system over the last 20 years, is measured by number of drugs approved per year, it's basically flat. So what does that tell us? It tells us that the current technology set hasn't really improved the productivity or the efficiency of the system. It's like we have a foot on the hose going from preclinical to clinical to approval. Our partners firmly feel that the cognitive revolution, the agentic revolution, is going to be a huge unlock to this problem. And when we then say, do we agree this is a problem? And what's the starting point? What are the human roles that we can augment today to bring value? And I think, what we've shown, we're a platform company. So we paint the picture of the possible with our CRA agent. But our customers, like I said, are using our agentic builder agent studio to build other collaborators for clinical development. But what the CRA agent has shown our partners is so eye-opening. We're seeing MSAs within 48 hours. Like, it's back to where we were when we were in the pandemic and everyone was like, hey, the only way forward is new technologies. With that said, there's still a lot to figure out on that journey. Now we have agent collaborators to humans. We need to be able to give our customers the autonomy over the autonomy, so to speak, right? So they need to be able to determine in this role, what's the right level of human in the loop, and where in the 90% of this work, and say an example of a CRA is tactical, not strategic. What part of that are we very comfortable with the system operating autonomously? And what part do we still want the human to really drive those actions? So to me, it comes down to, one, do we align on what the ultimate problem is? Do we believe that this is worth going after to show that there's value? Then really measuring that value, as Anita said. But importantly, in this world, it's also about system performance. We're going to benchmark against humans if we're saying this could autonomously work on behalf of humans. And beyond the performance, we have to then show that performance data in a way that generates trust. And that trust is super important, especially for the CRAs, the individuals using this. So I would say, I think this is an industry that when they look at 2026, they're saying we want to do more trials, but no one's saying we've got massively bigger budgets. A CRA is up to 30% of the trial budget. So how are we going to do more trials in 26 with the same number of people doing it the same old way? I think when we come down to how we approach the market, it's really, one, the mission is the boss. We're here to accelerate drug development. We work with partners who believe that this will provide leverage against that. And then we deploy and measure along that way and learn, and making sure we're really generating trust so that people are ready to scale when they can see the value.
Awesome. And I know we're coming up on time in the next 5 minutes or so. And Matt, we want to make sure we have a chance to ask you about how you think about partnerships in the market with startups, with earlier stage companies, given the scale and kind of market access that you have. How do you think about partnering with earlier stage companies?
Yeah, so in the context of what's going on, I think there's tremendous opportunity for everyone, and the ecosystem is important to Veeva. I'm old, so I've seen technology shifts before. I remember the pharma industry's first websites. I remember when cloud was invented. I remember when the iPad came out. And AI, to me, is basically the same thing again, except it's going faster and it has the potential to be bigger. And so when Veeva has announced to the industry our AI strategy, we actually said we think we can improve, or we can help to improve the overall industry's efficiency by 20%. Not some little workflow, not a big workflow. In general, to save the industry 20% of all of the money that it spends to do what it does. That's an incredible. And like, we had to pinch ourselves. Are we crazy? Like, how do you even put out a number that big? But I think if you ask Anita and Michelle, 20%, yeah, we'll do that. And so if you get enough Anitas and Michelles together, I think that together we can do it. Veeva has never been all about Veeva. It has always been about customers first and what we can do with our partners. And there's no way that Veeva is going to try to do it ourselves. So we're going to be aggressively making sure that our platform is available and open and integratable to the ecosystem of smart founders like the ones we have today. And the ones who are really good will buy them, and that'll make their investors happy.
May I just add one thing? We're a Veeva design partner, and I just really back up what Matt says, like, amazing to work with in the industry. So thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
That's awesome. Excited to see more of these collaborations. And so with about 2 minutes left, would love to ask the three of you to wear your founder hats for a moment and maybe share a quick piece of advice, 30 seconds or so, with founders that are early on their journey and thinking about building products and partnering with pharma companies. Anyone is welcome to jump in first.
All right.
Okay.
Well,
Go, Matt.
I'll take the first one here. I've been outside of Viva, I've also been investing in companies. I'm seeing lots of AI companies. And the one piece of advice I would give founders is to get the market sizing right, because the market sizing numbers are so big that they're hard to believe and they're hard to understand. And the way that I think about a market size is how much would a company of a certain size pay for the solution that I'm doing? And how many companies are there of that size and the next size and the next size? So I like a bottoms up. I think it's more meaningful and it's easier for an investor to understand. Otherwise, everyone comes in with these huge numbers and it's just hard to see how they all add up because the TAM of AI is bigger than the industry itself.
Great advice. Michelle, over to you.
Great. It's along the lines of, what Matt's saying. I think that we are in a moment where we should not think incrementally. And we've got to be taking the biggest bite of the apple. I think to this point, technology has followed a certain path, but now we're talking about full autonomy of human activities. So I think that my recommendation would be really think big about that market, go after a big market. But then when you execute, also take in a meaningful bite, but measure that value and measure it in these new ways. Don't measure it in the old way of measuring it. Measure it against what does it cost for a human to do this job today, for example, because the expectations are big for AI companies, but the potential is even bigger.
Awesome. And Anita, please round us out.
Yeah, I can't agree more with both Matt and Michelle here. Maybe my last piece of advice is taking us back to first principles, which is listen and ask questions. I think there's a lot of conversation about AI buzz on the startup side. I'll say there's equal noise on the customer side. And I would say it's really important in every conversation to hone in on the actual pain point and make sure it's not like a let's check the box on bringing in AI into our organization, but there is actually a problem and an opportunity to show true value that you can measure. Understanding their org, the drivers, current processes, that's going to help you shape your pitch, inform your product strategy, and qualify your prospects as well. And I think that's really important right now to get right.
Well, hard-earned advice all around, I'm sure. Matt, Anita, Michelle, thank you so much for sharing your insights. I wish we had longer, but excited to keep learning from your work and wishing you lots of continued success. And as our panelists drop, I just want to thank all of our fantastic speakers once again. We're in a very dynamic moment for pharma and AI, and realizing that potential is going to take lots of collaboration across the ecosystem. So thanks to everyone who joined today, both speakers and attendees who are contributing to that collaboration. And please don't hesitate to reach out to our team at Flare to continue the conversation, and keep an eye out for updates on our next expert roundtable, which will be on Tuesday, December 9th. Thanks, everyone. See you soon.